What's up, guys? I just want to talk to you about the three levels of employment that you can go through in your life. Now, number one is where most people are. It's where they are employed, where you're a W-2 employee for someone else's company. And it's a good level to be on. It's a great level to start on. It's typically not where most people want to stay, as the research shows that about 93% of people want to become self-employed, and only about 7% of people are. There is a very large gap in becoming self-employed, and I have found just from speaking with others that it's because they think it is a lot more difficult than it truly is to become self-employed. Now, when you think about becoming self-employed, everyone always assumes that when they go to be self-employed, they need to make $1 million, and it's simply just not true. You can actually make less money being self-employed as long as it's profit, and not in terms of just pure top line revenue, but as long as it's profit, you can actually make less money and yet still come out ahead than you were. And the reason for that is that when you are self-employed, it is all personal income. Therefore, you get to spend it. For example, when I first was self-employed last year, my self-employed income can get offset by more personal expenses or the same ones that everybody has. For example, you don't withhold any taxes, but when it comes to tax season and you pay your accountant to do your taxes for you, you get to write off all your home interest and everything still. You then also get to write off all your business deductions and expenses, and you get to write off just more things. And you don't need a lot of profit to actually make money, or you don't need a lot of sales in order to make money and in order to live your same lifestyle, especially if you move your lifestyle down while being employed. If you can figure out a way to live on $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month, the lower that you can get that number, the far easier it is to become self-employed, because you also make more of the profit. You take home all the profit when you're self-employed, which moves us into the second stage, which is self-employed. Now, the difference between being self-employed and employed by somebody else is really just that simple. It's that self. You work for yourself. You start a small little business. It's just you perhaps, or you have a few employees, but you're still employed by the business. You run the business. You pay yourself from the business. And this is where I am currently. And it is not the final stage, but it is where I am currently. I am self-employed, meaning I still am doing the work on a day-to-day basis. I don't have other people where I've now outsourced all the responsibilities. I still have to go and do work each day, which is another thing that people don't think about. Everybody wants passive income, but if you work for yourself, it's usually not as much of a pain in the butt because you don't have people to hold their guidelines. You have to set your own guidelines and standards, but you don't have to listen to anybody else. You don't have to report to anybody else. The only people that you have to report to and listen to would be your customers. And that is not a difficult thing to do. When they pay your bills and when you rely on them and when you're very appreciative of them, it's a lot easier to meet them where they are and to make a little bit of concessions to get things how they want it so that you can keep things how you want it, which is to stay self-employed. It's very nice to not have to wake up in the morning, go to someone else's office, sit through a bunch of meetings which don't mean anything, and just deal with other people that perhaps you didn't want to be around. Perhaps you don't like some of your coworkers and you wouldn't have chose them. Perhaps you don't some of your employees, you wouldn't have chose them, but the company made that choice for you. Now you get to set those own rules. You get to live by your own guidelines and standards, and you get to make your creation the way that you want it to be. Now, when your opinions weren't listened to as an employee, now you are self-employed and your opinions are the only ones that you have. That is the second level. The third level is being an investor. It is the owner of the company. You can either go from self-employed up to this stage by hiring out and scaling your company, or if you just make much money as a W-2 employee, you can then become an investor where you don't actually act in any of the day-to-day, as in you don't speak with your customers, you don't speak with your vendors, you don't do any of the operations, you don't do any of the selling. You have folks underneath you now, and basically what you do is deploy capital and deploy ideas and deploy strategy. And that is the level that most people want to get to because that is the passive income phase. And it is when you are an owner, investor, and you basically just get to put ideas into practice and then tell other people to go execute on them. You're not the executioner when you're self-employed. You're not the CEO anymore. You are an owner, a chairman on the board, and you get to decide on direction, vision, and then tell other people to go execute and get others to buy in that they want to go execute. And that is the next level from where I am currently. I would need to hire multiple more people. I would need a lot higher top line revenue. I'd need a lot more margin in my day and in my business in order to get to that. But you always have a starting point and you work through these phases. I've started off as an employed individual and I tried to build businesses part-time on the side as a side hustle, if you want to call it that, for additional income. And some of them ended up successful, but it is those little successes that gives you confidence that helps you build and build and build. And then you continue to build your skills as a W-2 employee. And once you have the skills that are necessary to go out, you can then become self-employed. It is a very easy jump, especially if you do not have a non-compete in your same space and you're allowed to just jump right into it, which is why companies put non-competes in place in the first place, is if it's something that is actually not truly individual to the company, because something that is if you go and say you work in a high inventory or a high cost to start industry or sector, they're typically not going to have a non-compete in their contract that you sign with them. For example, when I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, there was no non-compete when I was in that sector that said I couldn't go work then for Hertz or Budget, Avis, any of these others, because how difficult it is to get started. It takes a lot of money to purchase all those vehicles. It takes a lot of brand name that you cannot replicate. If the company is actually what draws in the customers, typically they don't have a non-compete in place. But if you are the person and the individual goes out and usually brings on business, if you go out and work in a sales role where you then develop relationships, they try to put a non-compete or a non-solicit in place because that their brand isn't what brought the business in, it is you. And therefore, if you go into one of those industries that have a non-compete, non-solicit, typically, and your company doesn't, it's because they allow you to go and then become your own company. And if you go into one and you do sign a non-compete, non-solicit, what you can do is learn everything that you possibly can and then go out and do it yourself once that time frame is over, or meet with an attorney and see what your options are. That's what I would recommend for you, because a lot of times non-compete, non-solicits don't actually stand up in a court of law. And as long as you don't go after their direct customers that you worked with or something like this, or just the customers that you know about at the company, you can get out of a lot of things. But I would always recommend meeting with an attorney. And I would also recommend not breaking your contract and your word. You did sign a legal document that says that you wouldn't do such a thing. I would not recommend going and doing that thing. I wouldn't. But meet with an attorney and discuss your options. There is your levels. You go from employed, where you learn your skills and you get paid to learn. It's the opposite of college. You get paid to learn now, opposed to paying to learn. And then you go to self-employed, where you deploy the knowledge and the skills that you just gained in hopes of growing and scaling. This is where you learn how to be a businessman and not just a salesperson or an operator, what have you. You have to take those skills of being a salesperson and an operator and what have you, and then execute on them for yourself. And then you can go and scale, and you learn how to become a business person through doing this. And then there's that last level where you now hire out all of those duties and responsibilities that you did throughout the day. And now you sit not really above them, but below them, where you actually feed their ability to do it better, and you continue to scale. Those are the 3 levels of employment that you'll work through in your life, and I hope that you achieve whichever one you're looking for. Take care.